Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.
The interview series, Reflections in Time, was begun by the late Professor Paul Borghi more than 20 years ago. This new series continues Paul's work and is dedicated to his memory. My name is Jack Newton. I'm retired now, but I'm still active as a professor emeritus. I've been on the faculty of UN Omaha since 1960, and I served for 20 years as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. I worked closely with Professor Borghi in the development of his original interview series, and I can think of no more fitting tribute to him than to continue this work. We're here in the studio this afternoon. It's a bright day in December, about 2 weeks before Christmas, and I have as my guest Rebecca Means from the UNO Registrar's office. Becky, welcome. We're delighted to have you here this afternoon.
It's fun to be here. Thank you.
I think we're going to enjoy reminiscing because we've both been here a long time. Got lots of things to remember, and there are many facets to your relationship with UNO. Starting as a student, then as an employee, as a faculty wife. You were married to Ray Means, who was in the library for a good many years. And I think in the interest of truth in advertising or something, I should mention that we've been friends for many years too, both you and Ray and my wife and our families. We started together here at as employees of the university back in 1960, the same year, members of the Newcomers Club together. Yes. And you lived practically in my backyard for a good many years too, and our kids grew up together, so yes. So that's great. So we'll have, as I said, lots of things to talk about, and we'll try to address all of those things that I mentioned, your various relationships with the university. But let's begin talking about you. Let's begin talking a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up?
I was born in Iowa, but I grew up from the time I was 7 in Omaha, so I'm practically a native Nebraskan. I went to Dundee Elementary School and Central High School. And
our kids all went to Central.
Our kids all went to Central, and
close tie with that.
Still think that's the place to go. So from there, I came to then Omaha University, where I got my undergraduate degree.
So you were a student here?
I was.
What years?
Oh, Jack, you shouldn't ask those things.
Well, I've already said you came here in 1960.
That's true.
So.
I came between 52 and 56. And have some great memories of those days. Well,
tell us a little, if you want to share some of those memories, we'd be delighted. What was it like back then?
Oh, it was smaller. It was, one thing I notice now is, in those days when we registered for classes, we took the classes we registered for. We didn't think, oh, I don't want to do this, or oh, I don't care for this. We just worked harder and took them and got whatever we earned. We had close contact with the faculty members, which was really wonderful. They took an interest in you, and our faculty members still do that. Our students today still say, people here talk to you. They really, they help you. And I said, that's what this is all about. And so that has maintained through the years, and I'm really pleased with that. We had things then that we don't now. Mai Day, which was a student holiday in the spring, which had floats and parades and skits put on by the students and competitions. We had Greek and fraternity sings on the front steps of the administration building at that time, which were, you know, white dresses and holding a rose and singing. Very, very impressive, very lovely. And we had, let's see, We had cooking in home ec classes. We had English. We had, I was here during the time of the flood down on the river, and students
That was in the late 50s?
In the
so, yeah.
50s.
I remember hearing people talk about that.
And they worked so hard, and students were sleeping on tables and in hallways, and everyone was doing everything they could to support the effort to preserve
It's
the
hard
levee.
to believe now, with the Missouri River pretty well under control, that they used to have those devastating floods.
Devastating, and people, everyone worked so hard. It was a magnificent effort. And we had bootstrappers in those days, who were the mostly Air Force, but military men who came here to finish their degrees.
That was a program that was worked out, if I remember, between President Bale, Milo Bale, and General Curtis LeMay from Strategic Air Command.
Right.
Yeah.
And they made a nice difference in the curve in classroom
So it
grading.
gave military people a chance to finish a college degree in order to, I guess they had an up or out policy, and if you didn't have a college degree, you didn't continue as a military officer.
Right. We had, there was Angel's Flight in the ROTC department, the ROTC cadets, and then Angel's Flight had uniforms and little blue capes that they wore and hats, and were the support troops for that.
Great.
Yep, it was fun. There were lots of formals and dances at Peony Park.
Peony Park, of course, was the place where
an amusement
everything
park,
went on. An amusement park, a big ballroom,
band concerts.
It's only a few years ago that stopped being.
Yeah. So now we have Peony Park High V, because that's
right.
where
there are still remnants
there
there.
are still remnants. Yes, yes, it was fun. So we had really good times. We used to also have commencement outdoors. Dr. Bale was president at that time, and in May, commencement was out on the football field in the stadium.
I remember those commencements
they were
quite well. It was very kind of impressive, where everybody marched across the football field in their academic regalia.
Right, and it never rained. And once Dr. Bale left, no one ever chanced that again. So, and of course, it wouldn't be practical in December, so which we now have. So, that was fun.
You mentioned for some of these events, people got quite dressed up, and there was a dress code back then, wasn't there?
There was a dress code. In fact, I didn't bring it with me. Les Valentine, who does the archives on campus, in the library, has a slide with a sign that has the dress code, and it's no shorts, slacks, shoes, the no service thing. And so that, that was a real change from what we are now.
And one definitely did not wear jeans on campus.
One did not wear jeans, and when my husband was in the library, at that time, the cataloging staff, who worked in what you would call a back room, came to him and said they thought they'd like to wear pants to work. And he said, no, that isn't on our dress code. And they said, well, we'll wear pantsuits. And Ray said, and you will come to work, and you will sit down, and you will take your jacket off and put it over your chair. And then you will get up, and you will go out into the public view in the library at the card catalog, and you will not put on your jacket. And how is anyone going to know that you came to work in a pantsuit? So that took care of that. That settled that for a while. I was talking to Ella Jane Bailey, who's still at the library here, and she remembers one time when Ray, who always had shirt, tie, and sport coat, said, well, I guess I'll get casual. Whereupon he took off his sport coat and turned his shirt cuff one turn under. And that was, never loosened the tie, but that was his idea of casual. So things were different in those days. Yeah. But we all survived it and didn't think anything about it. It was, that's the way we dressed.
It was a somewhat more elegant place.
It was.
So you graduated from Omaha, that was Municipal University of Omaha.
I graduated from here. I spent several years working in the library as a student, and then I did graduate and married Ray Means, who I met in the library.
And then you were in what program in
I was a sociology major with Dr. Sullinger.
And so when you graduated, you got your Bachelor of Arts degree?
Bachelor of Arts and Science. Well, I had the language, so it was Bachelor of Arts.
Yeah. And then did you, if I remember correctly, you did some teaching after you left the university?
I did. When Ray and I were married, then we moved over to Iowa, and the first year I did not work, but then the next 3 years that we spent there, I taught in junior high, which was a great experience.
Yeah, that must have been interesting.
It was.
What did you teach?
I taught English and sociology, or, you know, Ray taught the history and the drama, and did the class plays and sponsored the junior class. So we got to really do bits of everything. It was nice.
Well, how did, what brought you back to Omaha? I mean, why did, I know what brought you back. Ray got a job here, but, but how did he happen to come back to Omaha University?
Ray decided that he really loved teaching, but he wanted to do more professionally than to be a high school teacher. So he had an interest in libraries, and he decided to try library science. We went to Denver University one summer, and he liked it, and so for 4 summers we went to DU, and he got his master's degree there, and then was offered a job at Omaha U. So we came back here. And one of the fun things about that was we had our students, and when we told them that he had a job at Omaha U and was going to Omaha, they said, oh, well, they didn't think that was very good, but they guessed that was okay. And then they said, you know, went right on talking to me, and I said, well, no, we're going to move to Omaha. What? Why would we do that? We could drive back and forth. It was close enough. They had other people in the community who drove. I said, well, this is part of what we're doing, is to going back to be part of the community. So that was fun.
What was the, well, let me backtrack for just a minute, because Ray was working in the library back then in 1960, and that was a brand new library.
Yes.
And you must have been a student when that library was being built.
I was. In fact, over Christmas break, I helped move into the new library. We had book carts and pushed them through the snow and unloaded them in the stacks up on the 2nd floor. And one of those days, Eugene Epley was scheduled to come and view the library. And the word was to us as students that if he liked it, he would pay for it. And when it was Omaha U, buildings had to be totally funded before they were constructed. So if he then gave the money for it, it meant that it would be the foundation for the next new building on campus, which was very exciting. So, and he liked it. So he paid for it, and it bears his name. And
he was, of course, the hotel magnate who's the current building is named after, and the airfield is named after, the Omaha airfield.
Contributed a lot to Omaha. Yeah.
So that was a big change. In the old library was where?
The old library, and I worked in the old library, was in your building, Arts and Sciences.
Then called the Administration Building.
The Administration Building. And it was, I think it was on 2nd floor. And then you went, the stacks were down below, so that you went back to cataloging, and then there were spiral metal stairs that went down through 3 levels where there were shelves and shelves of books, the stacks. And as student workers that we called ourselves moles, the moles would go down, and a slip would come down. The student had requested a book. And we would scurry through the stacks until we found it, come back where there was an elevator, and send the books up on the elevator.
So that there were closed stacks back then.
Stacks.
Students didn't go out.
There wasn't enough room upstairs for all of them.
And that must have been a big change when the new library opened, the Epley Library, because then you had open stacks.
We had open stacks, and it was so spread out. And one of the librarians was saying it was difficult because it was so large and so spread out, and she was supposed to keep quiet because you weren't supposed to talk, of course, or be rowdy. And so there would be stacks and then tables with students, and so they could tuck themselves here and there in the stacks, you know, and go make noise and do things.
Yeah, I remember, maybe it came a little later, but I remember that there were some of the reading rooms that were quieter than others, and some where absolutely nothing was tolerated.
Nothing was, yes, right.
And others where you could even study as groups, and they had little rooms off
little reading rooms,
off the main reading room. And there were seminar rooms on the second floor up there, and
the curriculum lab for the College of Education was up there.
That's
with
right.
Catherine Danielson. And there was also a room that was a classroom, a teaching classroom, and then a room that had little tables and chairs, so that was when, you know, when you took children's lit, you also had a classroom that was set like that, and that was really nice.
And I can remember when I first came here, one of the things that impressed me was that there was a little theater in the audiovisual section where you could preview movies. If you wanted to, you're going to show a movie in class or something, there was this little, I don't know, maybe 10 seats or something in it, and you could sit in there and view a film. And it was really kind of kind of a good setup.
It was. We had lots of space, but not for always, because library expansion went on and the books, you know, increased, and so then there was a time when they put wings on the library and expanded it. And Ray learned things about construction that they hadn't taught him in library school.
In fact, the wing where you work now was not put on as a library wing, but as an office
That's
wing,
correct.
if I remember correctly.
And continuing studies used to be there.
Yes,
Connected in that building.
And that's the room on the southeast corner, right, of the building?
I think
if I remember correctly. And many of the people in my department, when I was a department chair in the late 60s, were office there, because that's when we were expanding, when we joined the state system and we didn't have enough office space. And they put up that little wing on the library for, I find it unbelievable now, but for $110,000 is what they built that for.
Oh my, Jack, that's remarkable.
It is kind of amazing when you think of it. But of course, it's been changed a lot since then.
Oh yes.
Then well, as long as we're on the topic, a few years later, as you say, libraries tend to fill up. You keep buying books.
Yes.
And we have another new library.
Right.
The one that we currently occupy.
And we have a newspaper clipping of our daughter, Erica, writing, well, actually not writing, sitting on the bulldozer when the ground was broken for the new library.
She was excited
so
by
that. Yes, that was exciting.
Yeah.
So, and that was a wonderful big facility with, you know, several levels and all kinds of space, which has filled up. Which is
filled up again. Now we need to start talking about adding wings or something to that. Okay, let's see. You came here as, I guess what we could call a faculty wife, because you were married to Ray. Faculty wives had their own organization, didn't they? Now it's the UNO Faculty Women's Club, but still there's a place there for faculty wives. Can you tell me a little about that? As I was looking through some of the older interviews that we have here, I have found nothing about that any place in this interview series, and we've had 100 interviews. So maybe you're in a good position to tell me something about it.
So is your wife.
Yeah, that's true.
And because we did come at the same time, and at that time they had, and we do now to a degree, have newcomers groups. And so we met as a small newcomers group in addition to the monthly meetings of the main organization. And we really got to know each other in those
so
times.
Make the new people feel more comfortable.
More comfortable, and someone to go to and see when they went to major meetings and things, because in those days most of the wives did not work outside the home. They took care of the children, they supported the endeavors of their husband, and they took part in campus activities. And so going to Faculty Women's Club was part of that. It was a little intimidating when you were a new wife, because we had people like Mrs Bale and B. Utley and Freda Helms, Dean's
Bale,
wives.
We all know because we know her husband's name, but Mrs. Utley, her husband was Dean of Continuing Studies at that time. Or before that, he was in the Political Science Department. And let's see, who did you mention?
Oh, Freda Helmstetter.
Helmstetter. Her husband was Dean of what at that time was called, see if I can remember it, the College of Applied Arts and Sciences.
Oh, I think that's right.
That's right. And that was housed in what's now the engineering building, or the old engineering building. I don't know what it's called these days, but it was the applied branch of the university.
Yes,
it had all of the applied programs: engineering, journalism, nursing, I think, number of other applied programs were all in that college.
Right.
So I didn't mean to interrupt your story of the Faculty Women's Club.
But it was an organization where we had informative programs. We'd have tea in the afternoon and have a program, have a speaker. We did have good times, and there would be a dinner party at Christmas for the holidays. There would be, we used to have a party for children. And Vet Williams, who taught in the College of Engineering,
Sylvester
Williams would come dressed as a wonderful Santa Claus and just ho, ho, ho. And some of us would get together and bake cookies for the party. And Dorothy Potage, who was in charge of the nursing program at that time, who did not have children of her own, would come and stand and bake gingerbread boys in my kitchen for hours so that there would be treats for the children.
Great.
So that was fun.
Yeah, I can remember those. They were a lot of fun. There were many sorts of things like that, and besides that, the club did things like raising funds for scholarships.
Right.
And then after 1968, when we became part of the university system, there was a good bit of coordination with the other campuses. We did things with the medical center and with the people. And there's less of that now, I think. But
right, but there was an effort to go to each other's meetings and to host their coming here for meetings, and we would go there for meetings. So there was an interchange, which was very nice.
Yeah, if I remember back, Mrs. Roskins, Lois Roskins, who was when Ron Roskins became president of the university, she actively encouraged things like that, didn't she? And
she did.
Major meetings in Lincoln where she invited people from all the campuses, tried to get them together and make it more like one university. Yeah, that was nice. It's too bad that's kind of gone by the wayside these days. Let's see, anything else you can think of that...
I talked about being somewhat intimidating. One of the things that I remember is that Mrs. Bale was to be honored when her husband, as president of the university, retired. And so there was a great deal of discussion how Faculty Women's Club would honor Mrs. Bale. And it was decided that there would be a high tea for her. And that year, I was president of Faculty Women. New, young, and no money. And I went to a meeting to discuss this tea with Mrs. Utley and some of the dean's wives. And they were talking about beautiful flower arrangements and magnificent silver and candles and food that, you know, and I just was terrified because we didn't have money. And one of them looked over, and I suppose I had concern in my eyes or something. She said, "Don't worry. If they're in charge, they'll see that it's taken care of." And I said, "Oh," and it was a magnificent tea. It was in the winter, and it was candlelight. It was high tea, and there was beautiful silver that was borrowed from Mrs. Utley's home. Lovely food, and I remember presenting Mrs. Bale with something, and she came up to me, and she was a very tiny little person and very quiet, and she looked me in the eye and she said, "Becky, don't make me cry." And so through the years I've kept that as a watch guard when I talk for people. So, but it was a fun time.
Yes. The oh, let's see. Is there something else I wanted to ask about that? There was, but I'll think of it later.
Okay.
It skipped my mind right now. Let's talk a little about what happened after that. You mentioned Milo Bale leaving. He retired in, what, 65, I think, or somewhere around there. He was followed then by Dr. Trebek, wasn't he? Leonard Trebek. And I suppose you had welcoming parties for Mrs. Trebek as well.
We did, and the one I remember about Mrs. Trebek is that she invited members of Faculty Women's Club to a tea at her home. And the hour was, I don't know, 3 to 4. So we thought that meant we could go anytime between 3 and 4. No, she had invited small groups, and she meant that you were there at 3, and we sat and visited as a small group until 4, and then our time was up. So that was a learning experience. Fortunately, I was on time that day.
I remember something about a, was it that party? It was something about cookies. Yes. You want to tell us that story?
She was very gracious in thinking that she wanted to do something to promote the university atmosphere, and so she had cookie makers, cookie cutters made in the shape of Wampi's head. Wampi was the Indian mascot for the university.
Back in those days, we were still the Omaha University Indians. We hadn't become the Mavericks.
Right. And the cookies were made at food service, and they were beautiful. They had red frosting and black frosting outlines and feathers. The school colors, red and black. The school colors. And when you ate them, your mouth turned red and black. So that was fun too. But that's what makes thinking back fun.
Right.
Yeah.
When did you start to work in the Registrar's office? I
started in, I'm not sure, in the 70s, 73 maybe. And at that time, faculty women were used to help with registration.
Right.
And that gave a consistent workforce at low pay, but they were the same ones. Previously, they had used students to help.
That's when we had these large mass registrations.
Yes, and we had IBM cards that were pulled and put in packets, and then they went off.
A lot of people today have never seen a so-called IBM card, but those were the days when you got information into computers with cards that had holes punched in them.
That's right. And there would be 11 cards. You'd pull a card for this information, that information, and then the packets were kept together and went to the computer center overnight, and the next day you were registered. So faculty women helped with that.
Yes.
And Virginia Bull, whose husband was with the College of Business, said to me, "You need to do this." And I said, "Oh, well, I don't know." But Virginia said I needed to do that, so I did sign up for that and helped fall, spring, and summer, as did your wife, Anne, and several others. And after we finished the registration in June, Jane Kemp, who was assistant registrar then, said, "You could come back to the office, couldn't you, and help finish this up?" Well, Ann and I decided we guessed we could. So we went back. So we worked in the office, and then there'd be something else to do and something else to do, and finally it was time to get ready for fall registration. So I was working for fall registration, and one day, and I just was doing it without any real thought of it's becoming permanent. But Gordon Hanson, who was associate dean in your college, came in one day and said, "Are you still here?" And I said, "Yes, I think so." And he said, "Boy, you picked a tough place to start." And I thought, Start what? And I've stayed.
Well, from everything I know from personal experience and from hearing other people talk, that you're a real mainstay of that office right now and do a great job.
Thank you.
You haven't been taken over by computers yet, and although computers play a much bigger role than they did when you first came here.
They do. They play a much bigger role, and it was Gardner Van Dyke who came and really promoted going to a paperless society.
Right.
And had people very concerned that they wouldn't have jobs, that the computer would do everything, but it didn't work that way.
We still had, even early on, computerized reports, I remember.
Yes, we did.
Probably that's a little bit of a misnomer, because there weren't computers that did it. They were tabulating machines that read the cards and then printed out the list of students and so on.
Yes.
But then later on, we went to full computerization, and now we've got full records of all the students on the computer.
Right.
So you've seen a lot of changes in that regard,
A lot of
too.
changes, yes.
Most for the better, I hope.
Many for the better, yes.
Have you learned to become a real computer wizard in the process? Or?
Well, those who work with me would certainly not use the term wizard. But
I didn't want to say witch.
Oh, thank you. They might say that. No, hopefully not. I've learned to use the computer. I've learned to work with people who use computers and learn the difference between technical minds and non-technical minds, and to be able to help those who are concerned about using them. So it's been fun.
Is there any anything you could think of that might interest people in the transition from a non-computerized to a computerized society here?
Well, one thing that I thought was very interesting when we went online for registration was we always had lines, and people, you know, objected to standing in lines, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. But when we would go online initially with the system, and the system would go down, then I would go out, walk down the lines and say, "I'm sorry, but the system has gone down. We don't know what the cause is. We hope it will be up soon." And students would wait very patiently. They didn't have the, you know, if you just went out and told them, that was fine. The only time when it was really bad was when the lines went all the way from the second floor of the student center, through the halls, down the steps, outside, and down the sidewalk to the current Epley Administration Building. And then we passed out cookies. But they were good about it.
I can remember back in the days of mass registration in the Fieldhouse, there was a certain spirit of camaraderie that developed there, not just among the people working there, but among the students. They were all...
There was. And that's something that we have not captured in another format. Students would come back in the fall, and their faculty members would be there helping to pull cards. They were there to answer questions. They were there when students would say, "I did this over the summer," and they'd be glad to see each other. But that's also where we either froze or boiled.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the faculty. There were, it wasn't just faculty wives or something working there. The faculty took turns and were there continuously. So there was always somebody from the faculty in a particular department available. And if it turned out that all the cards were gone from a particular stack, meaning that the course was closed, there was somebody there to talk to who could say, well, I think that maybe you ought to be thinking of this course, that this would be close to that other one you were thinking of taking, or be a good part of your program.
Right. So
that was a nice feature.
That hands-on help that was immediately there. So it was a very good feature, and it did promote a spirit of camaraderie.
Yeah. That was nice. Well, we've tried to. I know we've tried to replicate that with the newer system, and that the faculty members sitting in their office now can just look at the computer on their desk and tell instantly what courses are available and get the students signed up for them. So that, and then we went to telephone registration.
Yes, we did do that, and that went well. The only let's see, we gave out, somehow we got from the phone company the phone number of a man whose phone rang sometimes in place of the registration number. But we got that taken care of rather quickly, and so that didn't become a problem for very long.
Let's see, you're somewhere along here. Ray left the university to go to Creighton.
He did. And that was a soul-searching time for him. He had hoped for many years that he could have a private university and a library, and he had the opportunity to go to Creighton. And I remember his thinking at length about this, and one night when we were walking across the campus, he said, you know, nothing too big. If God would just send down some steps with a sign at the top that said stay or go, it would be great. But he did make the decision to go to Creighton, and was very happy with that decision.
And became library director there.
He was library director of the Reiner Memorial Library there, and went through a major addition and construction time with that building. So what he had learned here stood him in good stead, and he learned even more about construction than he knew before.
And was highly respected down
there. Very
respected,
yes.
Time of his untimely death. In fact, they even have a portrait of him down there.
There is a portrait of him that one of our UNO graduates, Steve Roberts, did through the grace of friends, that hangs in the Reiner Memorial Library, which is outstanding.
That's a nice,
it's a treasure.
A tribute. And that was, I suppose, a very good advancement to go from being assistant director here to being a director at a major
He was
library.
Very happy to have his own library.
Well, we've talked about the changes you've seen over the years, and changes in the Registrar's office, changes in the buildings on the campus, changes in the kind of the what's the word I'm looking for, the culture of the campus, I guess, when we went to a place where you had a small number of students and a dress code and all of that stuff to the large number of students. The big change, I guess, came in the late 60s when we became part of the state university system, didn't it? And at that time, I remember there was a huge increase in the number of students. I kind of talked about that a little while ago when we talked about building that addition to the library building to be office space for the new faculty members we had to hire. But if I remember, there was like 25% increase in the number of students or something.
It wasn't a big increase. Classrooms were full.
That made, of course, big. Well, I guess you weren't working in the Registrar's office back then, but that made a big increase in the amount of work that the registration people had to do too.
Yes, it did.
By the way, I haven't asked you, what is your official title now in the Registrar's office?
My official title currently is the Associate Director for Academic Support Services.
And what do you do in that role?
I get to be a troubleshooter and a resource person. I work with academic classroom scheduling, production of the schedule, which is online now, registration, commencement. And the best part of the job is that I get to see a cross-section of the campus. So I get students, faculty, and staff, and it makes it a really wonderful environment.
Okay.
I enjoy it all.
Well, you come into contact with a lot of faculty, or at least I presume you do. You certainly used to when you tell them what classroom they can have.
Yes.
And now do you still do that?
I still do that.
And
And
computers
some of them
haven't taken
still
that
don't like
over?
it.
Computers haven't taken that over?
No, but we have a new system that we're working on which will help with the scheduling of classrooms. So we're going to be working on that, have been working on it, and hope to get that underway.
So why don't you briefly tell us how that works right now? You ask the well, you know what the faculty member's schedule is. You know what courses they'll be teaching.
Right.
And do you ask them what classrooms they'd like to have for those courses? Or?
When the schedule goes out and the department fills out what's going to be taught on a certain semester, then they're free to put down any classroom they want for a spot. When the requests then all get to me and get processed through the computer, we may have 5 faculty members in the same room at the same time. So then my task is to decide who gets to stay and who gets to go. So, and there's a process on that I just have gone through, which is size, the physical setting of the classroom, how appropriate or inappropriate it is, whether it has movable chairs or whether it has fixed seating. Today it includes whether or not it's a high-tech classroom, which means that it has computers and a lot of mechanical things which will assist in teaching. Some use those and some do not. So there's sort of a need to balance that out. And as the longer we have them, the more demand there is for the technology because more and more faculty are coming to using that.
So do you have to keep all of this stuff in your head? Like this faculty member likes to have movable chairs because they like to split their class up into small groups, and this faculty member likes to use a room that has a computer projector in it, and this faculty member...
I try.
So that's all up here in your head someplace.
Some of it I have notes on. And sometimes if I don't know, then the dean's office will decide, or they'll have someone... it depends a little on the college who makes the decisions and the final on the technology.
That sounds as though you're about as close to being the indispensable person as we have on this campus.
I don't think so.
How will things work? Are you training somebody else to do this work too, so that you won't be the only person that knows all these things?
I have other people in the office who help and do some of the scheduling, and if I'm not there, they can help with rooms too.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, you arbitrate a good many controversies, I think, between who gets what room, and everybody ends up more or less happy, if I remember correctly.
They do, and really, people are. That's the thing about this campus, are the people, because they are really thoughtful and helpful. And if you explain, well, this is why this is. Can we work with this? Can I find something else? Most of them are, all of the time, very helpful. It's, you know.
You must run across the occasional ornery person that just says, it's got to be this way or else.
Sometimes, not very often.
Not very often.
Yeah.
What's the classroom situation like these days? Are there enough classrooms to go around, or do you have difficulty sometimes finding the appropriate classroom for a course?
We are short on high-tech classrooms at peak times. We have more classrooms this fall. It was less of a problem because of budget cuts. Spring was less of a problem because of budget cuts.
I'm glad that the budget cut reduced the problems for somebody. Everybody else I talk to tell me it's increased the problem.
Yes, it was very difficult for departments to decide what courses to offer, and that has impacted their decisions now with what size are the classes to be. Many classes are kept purposely small because it has been found that students learn better in that environment in certain subjects.
And there are some that are just dictated that way. If you're going
Correct.
to teach a speech class where people have to give
Right.
speeches, you've only got time to listen to so
many speeches, and to put a freshman or sophomore up to give a speech in a room that has 100 people in it is a frightening thing. So that's been a hardship. But then the other side of that is, then do we increase the size of the classes? If we increase the size of the classes, then do we have classrooms that are now big enough to hold larger classes? Because we have been concentrating on, not that all the classes were small, but those which were appropriately so were. So
and when the buildings were built, I presume that that was taken into consideration. How many classrooms of
Right.
different sizes do we need based on the kinds of classes we teach?
right,
And if you make a precipitous change in that,
that's right.
you're going to have problems.
Right, and that was true when Arts and Science was remodeled a few years ago. There was a lot of thought put into the size of the classes, and then having several small rooms that would accommodate
Yes,
those small
yes.
classes, and gave you more rooms for more sections.
Yes, I remember being involved in numerous conversations about things like that. And when we built, for example, when we built the Durham Science Center, that was
Yes.
a major consideration. And I was lucky enough to have been deeply involved
Deeply
in
involved
that.
in that, weren't you? You've seen a lot of change.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Can we talk a little bit about people? We have, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or so left, but that gives us a chance to. We've already had an opportunity to mention a number of names, but let's talk a little bit more in depth about some of the people you've run across. For example, when you first came to the university here with Ray, his boss was Miss Lord, Ellen
Right.
Lord. And can you tell us something about her?
She is a very interesting individual, and she was
I remember she was kind of a feisty person.
Yes, that's good. I was looking for
Small
what
in
word.
stature,
Small in
smoked
stature.
cigarettes constantly.
And but very energetic and very sharp on libraries and what she was doing and what she expected out of her people. She did fall, and she broke her hip, I think, and was down at St. Joe's Hospital for several weeks. Recovery time in those days were different than they are now. And she was there during the time of the additions onto the Epley Library. And I still have a very strong picture of my mind of Ray pushing her in a wheelchair through the building to view what had been done while she was gone.
I can almost picture that myself, even though I didn't see it.
Yes, yes. So she had interesting stories, and she was a good friend of the Dean of Women at that time.
That would have been Miss Hill?
Miss Hill.
Elizabeth Hill.
Elizabeth Hill, right. And
Did you know her very well?
I did know her. I was a student while she was Dean of Women, and she wore hearing aids, and one of my memories of her is when one of her, one of our favorite student leadership type young men was talking to her. He went down the hall and was going, and then spoke right up in her ear. And she had the good humor and, to appreciate that, and took it well, which he knew before he did it.
I think that she was interviewed as part of this series. I didn't do it, but I think Paul interviewed her. Yes.
Yeah, good.
We've talked about, well, you gave us a good description of Mrs. Bale a little while ago.
Yes.
What did you think of Dr. Bale?
Oh, Dr. Bale was interesting, and he was, I'd say, quite rigid in what he expected from his faculty and staff. And one of my story memories of him is when he interviewed Mel Olson to be choir director here. Mel came with a beard. Part of the job was Mel shaved his beard. Dr. Bale did not have faculty members out in public with beards. And he expected his faculty members to be neatly dressed. So.
Let's see, who else can we talk about? Is there anybody in particular? I've got a whole list there I can mention, but is there anybody you'd particularly like to?
Oh, there were Ray's staff, of course, when he was here, was very close. That was one of the happy things about being on campus. They were close friends, and we partied together, and there were people like Catherine Danielson, who had parties, and this is a Miss Lord thing. Miss Lord had a wonderful sense of humor, and Catherine Danielson gave a party for me when I was expecting our first daughter. And Miss Lord was in charge of getting the gift, which was to be a silver piggy bank. And there was cash to go in the pig. She inadvertently let it get in the incinerator, and so had to come to the party with this scorched pig and burnt offering, which Erica has to this day as a tribute to the affection. It was wonderful, and we laughed so hard. People were afraid I was going to deliver the baby after having eaten so much food. I didn't. So that was a fun story about them. I was also here employed during the time of the blizzard. Remember that?
Oh, yes, 1975. Is that it?
And you were the rescue man for our family because...
Because I had a four-wheel drive vehicle.
Right.
That was before SUVs were that popular, but I had probably an International Scout or something like that. No, I had a Chevy Blazer.
Oh, that's right, you had a Blazer. And I had a phone call saying, Jack will come and get you. Is there anybody, you had gotten Ray and Arlene Lindholm, who worked for him but who lived out in the country, and he had convinced her she could not go home. So you had gotten them home. You had gotten your son Peter and our daughter Erica home from Lewis and Clark safely. And there I was at the Registrar's office. And so I said, Jane Kemp was there. No, she would not go home because Art, who worked at Mutual, would come and get her. Gardner Van Dyke would not go home because he'd called his wife, and they lived way out west, and he'd be fine. I finally said, this is it. Jack is here. If you don't want to be stranded, you should come home with me. No. So you took me home, and we were there. Jane did not go home. Security came around and collected people, and they held hands to get them to the Student Center for safety and for spending the night on chairs and sofas. Gardner Van Dyke started out in his car and made it as far as Venice Inn, and that's where he stayed. Ray's staff, let's see, Marion Playfoot's husband was taking her home. He got her within 4 blocks of the house. She managed to walk 2 blocks, and he dragged her the last 2 to get her in the house because the snow was so deep and it was just overpowering. Vern Hazelwood, who was in the library and then taught library science here as Ray had done, got partway home and stopped and went into a house with other people who were storm victims, and the people said, oh, this is fine. You can stay here with us. We're fine. And immediately the power went out. And this is another dress code reflection thing. Vern was assigned some blankets, and he slept under the piano. So he took his shoes off, wrapped up in his blankets under the piano, and the family pet was to be either kept upstairs or downstairs. I don't know what. Now, Vern, and he loosened his tie. That's it. He loosened his tie and took off his shoes and socks and went under the piano. The pet got out and came down and started licking his face and woke him up, whereupon he sat up with a start, cracked his head on the piano and thought, this is bad news. Straightened his tie, put on his shoes, and got up. So,
we haven't had a blizzard like that in
no, we haven't.
Since then, I guess.
Arlene was with us 4 days. The blizzard was that bad.
Yeah.
And she crocheted an Afghan. She taught Erica how to crochet and called her husband almost every other hour to say, Russell, are the roads open yet? And they weren't. So
The people that stayed on campus and went over to the student center, if I remember the stories, did very well because they opened the refrigerators there and had plenty of very good food.
Sleeping accommodations weren't too great, but they did eat well.
But they did eat well.
And they had good times playing cards and, you know, yes, that was fun. So the library people did a lot of things together. Barb Rippey was here on the staff at that time, and that's where we all gathered the night that Kennedy was assassinated. Elsa Jackman was here as one of the librarians, and she was expecting a child, and we were expecting a child, and so Ray and Elsa decided we ought to get together and meet each other's spouses, and we became fast friends and still are, so that was a wonderful benefit. Marion Macaulay was here. He was here when I was hired as a student worker in the library, and then was here when Ray was here, and has stayed a friend for all those years. So we had lots of wonderful people.
I was trying to think of what the succession of chancellors was, or presidents, I guess they were called back then. It was after Dr. Bale was Dr. Trawick, we mentioned that, and then he left very suddenly after a year, and with a long story that's in all the newspapers, and people interested in it can find him there. But then, let's see, Vic Blackwell, didn't he take over?
Was he interim or was
interim
he
for before Dr. Naylor, or did Dr. Naylor become?
Then it was Dr. Naylor.
Yeah, maybe that's right. He became the
because he then
interim president and then president.
Right, and then the merger.
And then the merger took place. Right.
And he was a wonderful person, you know, and delightful, as was his wife.
Yes, yes. Any stories about her?
Oh, one story that I remember. She was. Here was another one that was kind of intimidating to us. Right. But she wasn't like that at all. And one of my fond memories, she and Stephanie Engebretson.
Rex was
campus planner.
Campus planning.
And Lois Trenholm, whose husband was on the music faculty, and I were in charge of a gourmet group. And so we would get together and have wonderful times. And one time we went off in the Naylor's truck, and Kirk Naylor sat in the back of the truck and played in the sand while Margaret drove. Yeah, they were great people.
We have about 30 seconds left, or a little less than that. So if you've got one final story you can tell.
There was a bomb scare once. And Ella Jane Doherty was working that night and called Ray and told him. He said, "Don't worry," showed up almost immediately in jeans she had never seen him in before, and said, "The police are coming, it is serious." And so they vacated the library.
Well, we've got to wrap up here now. I really thank you for coming in this afternoon, Becky. And to our audience, thank you for joining us in a visit with Rebecca Means, who has had a long time association with the university as a student, a faculty wife, and a respected member of the staff of the Registrar's office. We've been taking a look at some of the history of UN Omaha as seen through the eyes of the history makers. This is Jack Newton inviting you to join us again in the series we call Reflections in Time.
Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.